Hello and welcome to the debut series of our new podcast, Real Estate Development Land to Legacy,
Real estate development.
where we dive deep into the minds of industry leaders and innovators who help real estate developers every day to realize their dreams. And today, I'm excited to introduce Stephon Smith, a tech-powered commercial real estate analyst, Excel guru, founder of Accredev, a company that not only helps you underwrite deals, but also helps in fundraising, among other features. I just stole that from your LinkedIn profile, so I'll let you introduce yourself properly. Go ahead.
Thanks, Eugene. Yeah, so I founded Accredev a couple years ago after building out this all-in-one financial model that was designed to handle really any asset class I throw at it, but importantly, to store all my clients' projects in one place in an internal database within the Excel application itself, which enables a high degree of consistency across projects, but also within projects. And moreover, being able to compare an updated forecast to the original underwriting at any stage in the project's development. And being that I focus heavily on development, that's really important when projects get to their construction and absorption phases, because by that time, almost everything's different from underwriting, as we all know.
So what's the advantage of putting all projects into one database? How does that help a new project?
Well, I'll tell a story to drive that point home. My first client in commercial real estate, their CFO had just abruptly departed, didn't really give them any notice. And with him, he took the whole firm's understanding of the financial model. So they had no capacity to update their financial models and get a view of their portfolio. And that created a really high pressure need. So they hired me. Even though I had no commercial real estate experience, they knew me as an Excel guy. So I quickly wrapped my head around their model, but I quickly ran into this issue of juggling all these different workbooks, some of which were pretty similar to the others because they're all based on basically the same template, but some of which had deviated significantly. And then when I upgraded or updated a model and added new logical features, I'd have to replicate that in the other model for the other project. And it just became this really tedious, redundant exercise that was not appealing to my efficiency mind. So I developed a model that had a database in it so that I could just develop one set of logic and then simply save project parameters to that database and retrieve them into the active scenario, and thereby eliminating this crazy workbook juggling thing that I think a lot of analysts are used to doing.
And so how's the database stored? Is that like an external file, or is it just one giant Excel model?
So the database is one tab in the Excel model itself, and each column of data represents a particular project or scenario of that project. So it's basically just, however many dozens of columns that represent all my clients, all their projects, all the scenarios thereof, original underwriting, budget at fundraising, and then however many months into the construction process, et cetera.
Gotcha. And so that allowed you to take that tool that you've developed and start your own company?
Indeed, that was really the foundation of it. And initially, I thought I'd try software as a service, but then it quickly dawned on me that my clients don't really want to learn how to navigate and operate a new financial model, a new piece of software, especially one that's got so many inputs and so many nuances. It was evident to me pretty early on that my clients really just wanted good answers fast. And if I could give that information to them using my model, that seemed to be the right solution. So now, rather than software as a service, I consider Accredev software and a service. My clients can choose to use the software if they'd like, but it's not necessary. They can simply hire me or my analysts to handle the project data input, report generation, scenario management, et cetera.
What type of projects do you typically work on?
Primarily multifamily and hotel development, but the model does work for acquisitions too. So I've looked at office acquisitions with value add, multifamily acquisitions with value add, renovations and so forth. I've also modeled industrial and mixed use The only thing I haven't really touched yet in my career is retail. And hopefully that changes pretty soon, although not that soon, because that can be an immensely complex exercise that may require some additions and modifications to my model. So yeah, for now, my sweet spot really is that multifamily and hotel development, which although is perhaps slow in Denver, where I'm based, in certain markets is still quite hot.
Right. Right. Interesting. Yeah, I mean, we're actually starting to work on a hospitality project, so it's definitely around here. There's still new developments happening in hospitality and in retail. So, question: I myself consider myself an Excel nerd, and I don't consider alternate spreadsheets like Google Sheets or what they call them as a true Excel model. Like to me, it's
Right.
just whatever. It's like a viewer.
Agreed.
So,
Yeah.
what do you say to the DIYers out there? A lot of our partners they begin by trying to do it themselves, by building their own models, and some succeed, some struggle. How do you? What's your approach? What do you tell them?
Well, I just try to convince them that their time is better spent underwriting and not on software development, if you will, because
Mhm.
creating a spreadsheet and a financial model really is software development. And it's one of the rare edge cases that people tolerate non software developers handling the application development.
Mhm.
And as we've all seen, what that typically produces is a user unfriendly, rather unattractive, and poorly functioning model that's rife with circular references or errors, ugly formatting, poor ability to print a report in a way that someone who's in their 30s, 40s, or 50s can actually see the data without a magnifying glass. I mean, the list goes on. So, my goal is just to convince my clients that I will handle the software side and I will work with them to make sure that the inputs are valid and then they get every report that they need and every feature that they need in order to really understand the project, decide go no go, conduct due diligence, present a budget, raise funds effectively in the right amount of funds and the right mix of funds specifically, and then handle construction with a very keen eye on the detail and managing cash and risk, and most importantly, expectations with a degree of excellence that may be impossible to attain with one of these
Mhm.
ad hoc models that's put together in a very piecemeal fashion.
Gotcha. That makes sense. That makes sense. So on a typical development, typical apartment development, how much custom modeling is involved? Why can't somebody download a template off the internet and plug in the numbers and just be done with it?
That's a great question. So I think the model that I've built for Accredev is it's very useful because I've spent a lot of time on the capital stack side. A
Mhm.
lot of multifamily models, I think they're perfectly serviceable when it comes to modeling construction, absorption, rent growth, operating expenses, et cetera. I think all that is pretty robust in a typical model. But once you get into capital stack complexities, refinancing, and complex waterfalls, some of these fall short, especially when you have multiple tranches of equity.
Mhm.
And just as a for instance, most template models I've seen really generally only have one tranche of LP and one for GP. But in development, you have risk capital, then you have capital that's required for some of the soft costs right before you close on the loan, and then you might have a third tranche for the remainder of project costs. And then you might have a capital call, as we're seeing in unfortunate cases, but increasingly so. So you might have four tranches of equity, and in addition to the GP's commitment of equity, so really five total. And to be able to model that effectively and track how the cash is flowing over time to each of those tranches of equity, I think is really important. And so that's not something I find commonly in template models, but is indeed a feature of the Accretive financial model.
Along those lines, clearly your model and your expertise is invaluable. And I'm on my side, again, being an Excel nerd myself, I typically outsource early stages of model work, and then I kind of like to take it into my own personal hands, no matter how many people work for the company. When I run a project, I need to know the numbers very well. So I spend a lot of times with that model. And what I found is some models that are fairly complex with lots of macros, which that's one thing of Excel that I never learned is how to write macros. But that's when I found that to me, even though I'm a Power Excel user, it's difficult to tweak the model. In your case, if I understand correctly, is your management process, if a new scenario comes around that you haven't modeled before, it's just a matter of maybe a few clicks and some time for you to modify the model?
Yeah, so I've built so many features really in advance of ever having come across them in real life, but also anything I've come across, I've attempted to build into the logic of the model.
Hmm.
So, generally speaking, if a client throws a deal at me, the existing architecture accommodates the project just fine. But in the case that it doesn't, I do take it upon myself to quickly revise the model, update it, and add a feature that's applicable to all of my other clients, right? Because it becomes part
Hmm.
of the base feature set of the tool. And importantly, I charge by the month, or Accredev as a company charges a recurring monthly fee. So I don't
Hmm.
charge for the upgrades to the model. That's just part of the service that we are rendering. We charge ultimately to get answers to our clients as quickly as
Hmm.
possible in a high quality format.
That's excellent. Yeah, that's definitely different than just paying for a one-time fee like most other consultants do. If you don't mind me asking, what is your subscription fee, or what is the range? How do you determine what that service costs?
Sure. So this is currently in flux. I'm still early on in market development. So by the time this podcast comes out, it may have changed. So forgive me to anyone who gets attached to a number. But I've got four different offerings and there are two different flavors. The first flavor, it's just per deal. I do underwriting per deal, and this is really for feasibility and due diligence. And it's $1,000 per project, regardless of the asset class or the complexity, just a flat $1,000, and that gives a certain number of visions, a certain amount of meeting time, and a 1 month subscription or license to the model, and free support in that period of time, as well as any official PDF reports that I could generate from the model. So that's the first product, and then the other flavor, which includes the next three, are subscription plans, and that's really for clients that have multiple projects in the works or a high demand for one project.
Hmm.
So I've got a starter plan, a pro plan, and an executive plan. And those really just give access to my time and a certain number of analysis cycles per month. And as you scale up, you get more of my time and I turn things around more quickly. So on the starter plan, I turn things around in 5 days, 4 analysis cycles per month. And up to the executive plan, I turn things around in 1 day. And there's 20 analysis cycles that I conduct per month. So that's for the
Hmm.
developers that have, let's say, 5 to 10 projects going at one time, some in feasibility, some in due diligence, some in fundraising, some in construction. Whatever the mix is, I can handle all that given the architecture of the model.
So for the starter plan, for example, if somebody's getting into real estate development and wants to work with you to get their first model, they'll sign up. Is there like a minimum term, or could they possibly just pay for 1 month, get this one model done, and sort of be done with it? I mean, you and
Yeah,
I both know that we have to tweak the model as we go along, but
yeah,
hypothetically speaking,
exactly. Yeah, I don't have any minimum term. It's just 1 month.
right?
So I don't even have an annual plan offering right now. And partly
Hmm.
that's because I still have yet to test the market enough to see what the market can bear in terms of price and commitment.
Hmm.
Yeah, so for now, my starter plan's 2,000 a month, the pro plan's 5,000 a month, and the executive plan is $10,000 a month.
Gotcha. Gotcha. One of the common questions that we get asked is people that that haven't done a lot of the projects. Typically, they would call up one of their builder friends, and then they would call up a couple of their realtor friends and ask a question that goes along the lines of, "Well, how much is it going to cost per square foot?" And then their builder is going to be like, "Okay, well, I don't know. My last project was about pick a number, 200 a square foot. And so they would bury that number in their head, and they would think that the cost of their project is going to be that, and they're going to be able to sell it for whatever their realtor friend told them. How do you handle these?
Right. That's the realm of expectation management, which I think is really finicky. And people do get attached to numbers. I think that's one of the reasons people aren't selling their homes nowadays in a residential real estate context. They had big numbers in mind from a few years ago, and people don't want to come down from that. In the reverse case, we're thinking now of commercial real estate where people think of costs in archaic terms. Inflation's been bad enough that we may never return to those former glory days of low costs. So I keep going back to the model architecture. So at initial underwriting, or let's just say feasibility, go, no go, there is a cost of $200 per square foot. Time wears on, 6 months passes, costs go up $220 a square foot. Correspondingly, interest costs go up. Maybe also interest costs go up. We save a new scenario in the model. And side by side, we can compare that original underwriting, that feasibility scenario, if you will, to our new underwriting on which we're going to raise funds. And we can benchmark our expectations accordingly. We see what costs have done over time. And being able to see it side by side in a table, I think, is really powerful, both for the developer and for their equity partners and lenders. That if you had an original expectation of a 16% IRR and now it's 14%, you should be able to see that and know why by looking at all the assumptions that are relevant that have changed.
Right. Well, yeah, when we design a new project, for example, our 300 unit apartment building we're getting ready to start this summer, when we joined the partnership, I believe it had 301 units. We looked at it, we ran through cost estimates, and our construction team said, look, your cost is high, but we could probably make some changes and increase the unit count by reducing the overall cost of construction. So we went back to design team. First we went back to our analysis team that I was part of at the time, and we recalculated the model just based on the assumptions of our construction team. Then we went back to the architect, said, this is what we want to do. We want to increase the unit count. That would remove some of the features that would reduce the cost. The architect went through it, came back to us a couple of months later, said, unfortunately, we can't increase the unit count by that much for various reasons, but here's the new unit count. And so we went from 301 or 2 to something like 325 units, and then back down to 307 units. And every time that happens, not only the construction team needs to reestimate the cost of construction, but our development team needs to update the model.
Right.
And so if I understand, in your system, you would be able to track all of those versions side by side and kind of see the evolution, right?
Yes, exactly. And there's a particular report that is pretty useful that you can compare within a project, so the exact scenario you just described, but also across projects. So if you wanted to get a high level view of all the most recent forecasts for all your projects in your portfolio, you can set things up that way too. But it's primarily useful, I think, temporally to see how things have changed over time.
Got it. Tell me some of your best success stories that you've helped the clients and they've achieved the best results, or however they describe the success in that case.
Sure. It was probably my first client just because they were with me for so long and I onboarded them to the system. And rather than having that crazy juggling act of all their workbooks, it just became one master file, one master workbook that we could manage their projects from. So I'd be in calls with them and we'd be working on a project in the Pacific Northwest, and they'd have me change a few inputs and they'd see what the results would be. Say, great, go ahead and save that. Okay, why don't you load this next project? And we jump right into the next one. Sometimes on calls, we'd look at 3 different projects in a given hour or 2 or 3. And that just allowed them to make decisions really rapidly. And they were able to make huge progress with developing a ton at once, which was pretty exciting. Mm-hmm. So that's probably the biggest success I've had. But, more generally, just onboarding clients in general to this system that I think is a lot tidier and a lot more conducive to getting the results they need quickly and in a way that they could share with their equity partners and their lenders so that they could just plow forward on their process without getting hung up in the analysis department.
Excellent. How long does it take for you to onboard a client or to get the new project inputted?
I say my onboarding's immediate because really all it is taking their existing financial model and entering data into mine. If I need to, I'll interview the client or send them an email asking them some questions to get any gaps filled. But that's true regardless of where I am in the process with the client. So day one with the client's the same as day 300. It's all the same. So one of the benefits I offer is that immediate onboarding without training, and I'm just faster in that regard than hiring a W-2 analyst.
And at which point do you think you should get engaged in a project? How early or how late in the development cycle?
Because I built the model for development specifically, although it works quite well with acquisitions, I think it's really great at the due diligence and construction phases. It's probably over-engineered for feasibility, although it does a very good job at it. It's just probably a little slower than it would be if you were operating a model with 1/10 the amount of inputs, because the 90% extra that are in the Accredev model are probably of pretty significant diminishing returns when just figuring out go, no go. So yeah, like budget, fundraising, construction is really the sweet spot for Accredev.
Gotcha. Interesting. What would be the sort of the worst case scenario? What's your worst story, nightmare client or nightmare situation that you can think of?
Well, one project was so deep into construction by the time I got hired to handle it, and I didn't underwrite it, that the project was 25% over budget. It was $8 million over budget and had significant construction delays. So their absorption was pushed way out. It looked like their rents really were not increasing that much to offset that horrible cost overrun. So I had to take an existing model and tweak it and then sort of attempt to shoehorn it into the one I'd created. But it was so far down the line and it was a new product type that it was very hard to remain dexterous on that one. Ultimately got it done, helped with the negotiations with the bank and the equity partners. There was a lot that needed to be restructured, but it got built, it got leased up. Rents are now higher than they expected at this time. So that offset a lot of those cost increases and delays. But that was pretty much a nightmare working on that one. It just took so much, way disproportionate amount of time that it should have, frankly, if it had been properly designed and executed from an analysis standpoint from the get-go. But coming in halfway through, I was sort of in a lurch. Yeah, I don't ever wish to repeat that one. That was not fun.
Wow. Yeah, that does sound bad. So what's the lesson learned?
The lesson learned is use an underwriting model that you intend to continue to use through construction and absorption phases rather than trying to create a brand new system. And maybe more importantly, from a more general level, don't expect the project to go according to underwriting. I think a lot of developers are learning that now that conditions are so much tougher with higher costs, higher rates, higher cap rates, flat rents, higher insurance costs, higher security costs. I mean, the list is long of headwinds that the development world faces. So, really the key is don't assume that development is going to be a breeze and you're going to be able to make up for any overruns or inattention to certain aspects of the contract with giant rent increases. It's just not the world we live in anymore, which I think really makes me want to press on that point that ongoing forecasting through the construction and absorption period is paramount. And that's why we've designed our process the way we have.
Right. Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Another question that I seemingly talk about a lot, especially recently, is the role of AI in modeling, in construction and planning. Have you encountered it? Do you use it? What do you think of it?
I use ChatGPT every day. I use it, really, it's kind of like a business advisor almost. I use it to help me articulate certain aspects of the value proposition. I use it to conduct research. I occasionally use it to write code, but I'd say it's a C plus at best at writing code. And more often it's a D or F. And that might just be because I'm not good at prompting it yet, but it has some logical inconsistencies. And although it's like a brilliant savant in certain ways, it knows all the math theory in the world, basically, it's not good at applying the correct math to the task at hand. And the times I've asked it to figure out complex waterfall scenarios, it's really botched the whole situation. So I'm skeptical. I'd say I'm optimistically skeptical about AI's capacity to handle modeling in the near term. Although in the medium term, I know I'm going to have to really wrap my head around it. Accredev is going to really have to become sort of an AI type company. And then ultimately, who knows how, in however many years, we might just be obsolete altogether. It's really anyone's best guess at this point, with general artificial intelligence on the horizon, whenever that's going to come about. But I don't think humanity's quite reckoned with all the implications of that yet. So we're just taking it day by day and doing what we can to sort of stay ahead of the curve as best we can.
Right. Well, I think you had an excellent point there about writing the prompts. That's going to be the skill of the future.
Yep.
Yes, the computer can answer the question, but can you ask the right question?
Yes, that's going to become probably the most valuable skill that a human can attain, which it's verbal giftedness, it's logical giftedness, and then just almost thinking like a lawyer, but also a mathematician. And I think few minds are going to be able to handle it on their own. It's really going to have to become a team approach to figuring out exactly the right questions to ask. So it's going to be an interesting challenge.
Right. Yeah, I've been intrigued. I was reading recently. I've been using ChatGPT myself, but like a standalone thing. But I was recently reading about Microsoft's Copilot, which I think is essentially using ChatGPT, but they got it embedded into Microsoft tools. Have you played around with Copilot yet within Excel?
I haven't. I'm sort of how do I say this? I'm an Excel isolationist. So I don't link to the web. I don't link to other workbooks. I generally am very trepidatious when it comes to these new AI and web-based features, because I've seen so many examples of that breaking. And when it does, it could be catastrophic. Anything that Accredev does is in the native Excel environment. We do use a fair amount of VBA just to really automate certain processes and make the user experience more friendly. But yeah, for now, I'm staying an isolationist until all these features are very well proven out, and I know it's not going to blow up the workbook.
Right. Yeah, I can appreciate that. I've lost too many workbooks when I had to go back and recover a backup from a month ago and be like, okay, well, I guess we have to redo the work for the last month because something broke and it's faster to just recover the data than trying to fix the error.
Exactly.
One nerdy question that listeners might not even be interested in, but simply because I've dealt with this so many times. I remember you posted something, you mentioned it earlier today about circular references and how you were against circular references. And I actually have one of my templates where I specifically programmed the circular reference to calculate interest reserve. Why are you against them?
Well, primarily they slow the workbook down a considerable amount. And when you're dealing with a 15 megabyte workbook like the Accredev financial model, that's speed that really is not able to be given up. And moreover, it makes logical tracing really challenging, right? I trace dependence and precedence a lot in the development process, the application development process, to be precise. And to lose that is a huge, it creates kind of a black box that I can't look into anymore. And moreover, I think it's more interesting to extricate the logic of the circular reference and build a schedule that iterates in a way that the user can look at. So for instance, when I'm calculating the loan and how it's drawn, and therefore the interest reserve and how much equity is going to be required in this iterative process, I've got a 10 iteration schedule below the main report module of the financial model. And someone, if they were curious, and I do this all the time, can go and look at how each one of those iterations changes from the prior one. So by the end, it creates a reference that I can put into mine. And the last iteration of this call it construction draw and interest calculation perfectly matches within, 1 or 2 pennies, the schedule up top that the user is going to see. And sorry if that didn't make total sense. It's like hard to wrap my head around and articulate it clearly, but there's a way to get around circular references is my point. If one just spends the time building that logic in a set of ascending or descending iterative calculations, that it makes it more transparent and ultimately more auditable, which is a huge thing for me.
Got it. Well, I think at the very least, if somebody doesn't really understand what you're talking about, you made a good point that you really know what you're talking about.
Appreciate that.
Excellent. Stephon, any other points that you wanted to make today?
I think just that development's super tough nowadays, and I think processes need to adapt, and that starts with the model and its proper design, but then it's also the analyst that comes with it. And I think to have a complete package is essential to managing feasibility, due diligence, fundraising, construction, and absorption, and having a keen eye at every step of that process so that you can manage risk, cash, data, and perhaps most importantly, expectations to a high degree of attention.
That's very good advice. Thank you for your time, Stephon. How does one find you?
So I'm on LinkedIn. You can find me. It's Stephon Smith. My name's Stephon Smith, odd spelling. And you can also find my website, Accredev.com, another strange spelling, ACCREDEV.com.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And of course, we'll have those links in the podcast description and on YouTube. We will be producing these episodes weekly, and we'll have a number of interesting, amazing, useful guests who can share their experiences with our listeners. Stephon, thank you very much.
Thanks, Eugene.
Accredev founder on the mic, crunching numbers day and night. Deals will never go awry with Stephon by your side. Spreadsheet, king of the land.